Guten Abend, heute mache ich ein authentisches deutsches Essen mit Sauerbraten, Rotkraut und Knödel. Good evening. Tonight I'm going to cook an authentic German meal with Sauerbraten, German red cabbage, and Knödel, which are a type of potato dumpling. When I was a young boy, we used to go to my Tante Marie's house, and she would cook for us. One of her specialties was Knödel, a German potato dumpling. There's different types of Knödel. Some are made with cooked potato and flour. Some, halb und halb, are half and half raw and half cooked potato. And then the most difficult to make is Rohe Knödel, which is out of 100% raw potatoes. Tante Marie would always make her Knödel with raw potatoes only. So that's the style that I'm going to be making. All Knödel are served with gravy, and that's why I decided to make Sauerbraten and also Rotkraut, red cabbage, to go along with the Knödel. So let's get started. First, let's make the Sauerbraten. I marinate the beef for about a week in a brine made of red wine vinegar, with spices including bay leaves, black peppercorns, juniper berries, cloves, garlic, celery, and some onions. If it's a little too sour, you can add some sugar, but that's not always necessary. Next, I begin frying some speck, pork fat, in a pan that is able to go in the oven. In the US, we don't have access to that, so we usually use bacon. And I cook it to where it's just beginning to melt and brown. Then I transfer the Sauerbraten into this pan. I preheat the oven to about 350 degrees. Then I make sure to brown the Sauerbraten on all sides. Then, after the Sauerbraten has been browned on all sides, I pour the marinade over it. I then put the pot covered in the oven where it can bake for about 2.5 or 3 hours, checking to make sure it doesn't run out of liquid. After it's done cooking, I remove it from the oven. I take the Sauerbraten out of the pot, and then I strain the gravy to remove the black peppercorn, juniper berries, and cloves, as well as bay leaves. Then I add flour and stir to thicken the gravy. Next, let's begin making the Rotkraut, the red cabbage. First, get your Dutch oven or other pot that can be put into the oven. Begin cooking some bacon. Cut up an onion and also put that in. And then cut up the head of red cabbage. Take the core out and then shred it finely. Put that into the pot and mix well. I add salt and some black pepper, and then add some vinegar. You can use white vinegar or you can use red wine vinegar, whatever you prefer. Next, I add caraway seeds. These are optional. If you don't like caraway seeds, you certainly don't have to include them. To balance the sourness, you can add some brown sugar or honey. That's optional and to taste. It may not be necessary, depending how sour you like it. Then when all the ingredients are blended together, I put the Dutch oven covered in the oven for about an hour or an hour and a half at 350 degrees. After it's baked in the oven for about an hour or so, it's cooked down and softened. I then set it aside and keep warm until it's time for dinner. Now it's time to make the knödel. First, you need to peel your potatoes. I tend to prefer russet potatoes. Some types of potatoes are too wet. You want a starchy, floury potato rather than one that is more waxy. Next, you grate finely. It's important that you use a fine grater rather than the more coarse shredder that we often use for, say, cheese. I do not use food processors. They tend to beat the potatoes up too much. It is a lot of work to grate by hand, but it is definitely well worth it. The other thing that I do is grate into water that has been pre-treated with ascorbic acid or vitamin C. If you don't do that, the potatoes will turn brown or gray and they won't be that beautiful white color. Next, I put the grated raw potatoes into cheesecloth. I drain, and then I try to squeeze out as much of the extra water as possible. And that's very important because if they're too moist, they will have trouble holding together when you cook them. I find there is always much less potato left after you squeeze out all the water. Now you can save that potato water for cooking, baking bread, or even collecting the potato starch at the bottom after it settles out. Meanwhile, in a pan with butter, I put in some pieces of bread and I begin frying and browning them. These will become the stuffing that we will place on the inside of the knödel. You want it to just start getting brown and nice and crispy. Next, I put a pot of water onto the stove and begin preheating it so it'll be ready when the knödels are done being shaped and they're ready to cook. While the water is heating on the stove, I put the grated potatoes into a bowl. Some recipes include egg, some don't. Some recipes use wheat flour. I prefer to use potato starch. You can save the potato starch that settles out of the bottom of the potato water. I'm a bit lazy, so I use potato starch that I had purchased. Then you mix it all together until it has a firm consistency. There isn't any measurement, it's done more by touch and feel. You want them to be firm enough so they hold together when they're being cooked. You can add more potato starch if needed to firm them up, and once they are firm enough, you can begin shaping them into balls, roughly the size of a baseball or so. Once they have been shaped into balls, then I put an indent into the middle and put in one of the crisped pieces of bread into the center, and then I close it back up and shape it into a smooth, round ball. Next, I check the water. This is boiling too vigorously. If you put them in, they'll fall apart. You want something more like this, a very light simmer. It's very important. If you boil too vigorously, they will fall apart. I slowly simmer for about 30 or 40 minutes. Then when they float and are firm, they're done. I remove them carefully with a slotted spoon, and now you're ready to plate them up with the Sauerbraten, Rotkraut, and of course plenty of gravy. Now, for those of you who have never eaten a knödel before, there is a trick to it. You start opening it up from the top, pull down the sides, exposing the crispy bread in the middle, and then you cover it with lots and lots of delicious gravy. Das schmeckt gut. Das ist lecker. It tastes good. It's delicious.
toast.